All right, so we're going to talk about breakfast versus school energy. This is our AP Stats final project. I'm Hanson.
And I'm Amanda.
Okay, so let's introduce what we're doing today. It is without a doubt that high schoolers in today's generation endure early school start times and long hours of homework. Having to work late at night and wake up early can impact students' sleep hours and choice of breakfast. We've decided to use the skills and concept learned in AP Stats to investigate how these two factors contribute to a student's energy level on a typical school day.
All right, so we're going to begin with data collection planning. To gather evidence for our study, we utilized a Google Forms to create a sample. Our population of interest was all IHS students, so students from all 4 grades of our school. For sampling, we used voluntary response, but we also used snowball sampling, which means that we contacted a lot of people that we knew, who then contacted a lot of other people that they knew. The minimum sample size required was 50 students, but we were able to gain a sample size of 82 students. Continuing the data collection information, we used 4 questions, 2 qualitative and 2 quantitative. Our first qualitative question was, do you eat breakfast on a typical school morning? And the answer was yes or no. And then our second one was, if you answered yes to that above question, what's your ideal beverage during breakfast? And we gave the options coffee, tea, orange juice, milk, or other. And then for quantitative, our first question was, how many days per school week on average do you find yourself feeling tired? So that would be on a scale of 1 to 5. And then the second one was, how many hours of sleep on average do you get every school night, which was a free response answer.
All right, so let's talk about our findings for the first question. Do you eat breakfast on a typical school morning? So based on our sample, 76.8% of respondents eat breakfast on a typical school morning. 23.2% of respondents don't eat breakfast on a typical school morning. Based on our sample, it is reasonable to conclude that most Issaquah High School students eat breakfast on a typical school morning.
Okay, so our second question was, if you answered yes to the above question, which Hanson just described, what is your ideal beverage during breakfast? So based on our sample, we found that 7.1% of respondents prefer coffee, 11.4% prefer tea, 14.3% prefer orange juice, 18.6% prefer milk, and 48.6%, which is almost half, prefer another type of beverage with their breakfast. So based on our sample, it's reasonable to conclude the following ranking order for preferred beverages. So the first would be other, second would be milk, third would be orange juice, fourth is tea, and 5 is coffee.
So how many days per school week on average do you find yourself feeling tired? Let's see what we found from this. Based on our sample, 6% of respondents feel tired on an average of 1 day per school week, 12.2% on 2 days, 11% on 3 days, 22% on 4 days, and almost half, 48.8% on 5 days. Now, based on our sample, it is reasonable to conclude that almost half of Issaquah High School students feel tired on all days of a typical school week, and 81.8% of students feel tired on at least 3 days during a typical school week.
Lastly, for our question, how many hours of sleep on average do you get every school night? We created this bar graph. And then I'm going to describe the characteristics of this bar graph. So the spread, average sleep hours on a school night range from 4 to 12 hours. There is an outlier at 12 hours of sleep. For center, the mean average X bar would be 6.54 hours per school night. And the shape appears to be about bimodal with 2 peaks at 6 and 7 hours.
Now, let's talk about our overall summary. So, first of all, most Issaquah High School students eat breakfast on a typical school morning. For those that eat breakfast, almost half of them prefer a beverage other than milk, orange, juice, coffee, or tea. I don't know what that other beverage is, but that's apparently the case. Almost half of Issaquah High School students feel tired every day during a typical school week, and 81.8% of students feel tired on at least 3 days. Issaquah High School students get about 6.5 hours of sleep per school night on average. Now, it looks like among Issaquah High School students, eating breakfast with any beverage and sleeping an average of 6.54 hours on a school night still leads to roughly 81.8% of students feeling tired during at least 3 days of a typical school week on average.
So the problem, I wanted to know the average proportion of IHS students who prefer milk with their breakfast, given that they eat breakfast on a typical school morning. So I conducted a study by taking a simple random sample of students from my school, and I wanted to use my information to construct a 95% confidence interval to estimate the true proportion of all IHS students who prefer milk with their breakfast. So to begin, I'm going to state some of the information that I used for calculation. The P equals the true proportion of IHS students who prefer milk with their breakfast. The sample size N would be 70. So those are all the people that answered yes to eating breakfast on a typical morning. P hat would be 13 out of 70, which equals 0.186. And the critical value, using the calculation of inverse norm in my calculator, I found to be 1.645. For conditions, the random condition is satisfied because the problem states that I use a simple random sample. The 10% is also satisfied because my sample of 70 high school students is less than or equal to the number of 10% of all IHS students. And finally, the large count is also satisfied because 70 times 0.186 is greater than or equal to 10, and 70 times 1 minus 0.186 is also greater than or equal to 10. So because all of these conditions are met, we can proceed with a one sample z interval. For calculation, I use the equation p hat plus or minus the critical value times the square root quantity of p hat times 1 minus p hat divided by n. By plugging in all my values from earlier, I found the interval to be 0.109 to 0.263. In conclusion, we are 95% confident that the population proportion of IHS students who prefer milk with their breakfast, given that they have breakfast on a typical school morning, is between 0.109 and 0.263.
Okay, now let's do the significance test, specifically for means. I'm interested in studying the average number of sleeping hours that United States high schoolers get on a typical school night. Studies claim that an average United States high schooler gets 7.25 hours of sleep on a typical school night. I decide to test this claim. I get a simple random sample of 82 high schoolers and find that the mean hours of sleep was 6.54 hours. Does this data provide convincing evidence that all high schoolers in the United States get less than 7.25 hours of sleep per school night on average? I'm going to use the alpha equals 0.05 level. Now let's state what we have. Mu is the mean hours of sleep that a United States high schooler gets on a typical school night on average. My sample size is 82. My degrees of freedom, which is n minus 1 equals 81. My x bar, which is my sample mean, is 6.54 hours. My sample standard deviation is 1.13 hours. My null hypothesis is that mu is equal to 7.25 hours, and my alternative hypothesis is that mu is less than 7.25 hours. So for the conditions, random, I stated that I used a simple random sample. So that's met. 10%, it is reasonable to conclude that a sample of 82 high school students is less than or equal to the number of 10% of all high school students in the United States. So that is met. Normality, 82 is greater than 30, so I met the central limit theorem. So that is also met. Because all conditions are met, I will safely perform a one sample t-test because for means, we have to use t-tests. Now, this is the formula for getting my t-value. After plugging in all my values, I get that my t-value is negative 5.689666767. The probability that t is less than or equal to negative 5.69 is TCDF function. I plug in all my values and I get the p-value being a very, very small number. Since it's less than the alpha level 0.05, I will reject the null hypothesis. Because alpha 0.05 is greater than our p-value, there is convincing evidence at the alpha equals 0.05 level to suggest that the average number of hours that a typical United States high schooler gets is less than 7.25 hours.
Okay, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. We hope you guys all gained some valuable information on the breakfast choices and sleeping patterns of your fellow IHS classmates.